this exploration of trauma, I'll look at the crisis of no face. Now, in our engagement with the world, we have two presences, if you will. We have the mask, and we have the witness. Now, the witness has no shape. The witness watches. The witness is. Whatever goes on between the identities and the identities, the shapes that are going on in human beings in the world, the witness watches in its purest form. The witness has no particular reaction. There's just a state of exalted being. But the shape is the pattern of the ego. It is the one that identifies, that attaches to the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. So we have the witness, and we have the identity, the observer, and the ego. So to have a pattern, to have a mask, a face, is to have a pattern of thought, a pattern of feeling, a pattern of speaking, and a pattern of being. So, what we say, what we think, what we feel, what we do, and how we be. We have a pattern of action. This is our identity, and we reference ourself by looking at the pattern. We guide ourselves by the pattern. Yesterday, I was a Republican. Yesterday, I voted Democratic. Yesterday, I did this. Therefore, I am a Democrat, a Republican. Therefore, I will go to church again like I did before. Therefore, I went to work yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that, and I will continue the continuity of the pattern. So, in that sense, identity is largely self-referential. I am the one who thinks this and does this, and so therefore I will continue to think this and do this. There's relatively little examination of the pattern of the identity. We don't wake up and say, yesterday I voted Republican, and yesterday I went to church, and yesterday I felt blessed when I went to church, and I did this and I did that. We don't wake up and say that and then say, well, wait a minute. Who are the happiest people on earth? What is the greatest conservation of energy to be found on the planet? Forget all the things, forget the English language, forget my typical diet, forget the typical clothing, forget this. Let me just start from scratch and do the most intelligent thing that I can think of from new thoughts, from new data today. No, we repeat the pattern. And the pattern provides guidance. Now, the individual identity is nested within the family identity, which is a cult representation of the culture, of the culture. The family is a nested representation of the culture. So the culture is the largest pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And in order to nest, to belong, to be a part of, that culture culture, we copy that system in the family system. You know, we could just wake up when we have children and say, you know, what is the most important life skills that my child is going to need to learn? Let's see, algebra. When's the last time I used algebra? Nah, that's not the most important skill. What about driving a car? Okay, that's not taught in high school, but who cares? I'm going to teach my kid to drive a car. And what about cooking? It seems pretty basic, you know, 3 meals a day for the entire lifespan. Maybe we'll learn to cook, right? What about massage? If people had a daily massage, and if people exchanged a daily massage, do we know how much happiness and well-being would accrue? Let's add in massage. What about the ability to think, not to copy the cult dogma, but to actually think, to use external data to perhaps compare cultures over time, to compare cults and say, well, you have a cult of assuming this, and we have a cult of assuming this, and you know, this cult seems to be conserving more energy to create more sustainable well-being than this cult. And so we're going to use that as the base model, and then we're going to start iterating. So what about actually learning to think as opposed to learning to copy the cult? And it's like, well, you know, this would be a transcendence of the cult. This would be to live, to evolve, to think. But for the most part, we cram our unwilling kids into unwilling school buses and cart them off to learn the cult. I went to school, your grandfather went to school, and you are going to go to school. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear how stupid it is. I don't want to hear what bullies are at the school. I don't want to learn how much cruelty is there. I don't want to know about any of this stuff. Just go and do the thing that cults do, which is the thing we've done before, which probably had something to do with preparing people for factories in the 18th century or something like that. But go do it and don't think about it. And I'm going to go and do what I do, which is abandon my family and go do a job that I don't particularly want to do, because that's what real people, real men, you know, do in our cult. And so that's what I'm going to do. And you should, you know, do this and then run around with a ball and just do the things that everyone else has been doing. And so we have the cult dogma, unedited, relatively speaking. The diet, that's what we've done before. That's what I grew up eating, so that's what I'm going to eat, You grow up eating grasshoppers, so that's what you're going to eat. Well, I grew up eating white bread and bacon. Well, which is healthier for you? Probably objectively, the grasshopper, organic and higher protein, and but it doesn't matter. You grew up doing that, so you're going to do that, and I'm going to call that disgusting. And I grew up doing this, and I'm going to call it civilized. And it's very easy to make up a cult, and even easier to copy it without thinking. But that's how cults breed cult members that conform with the cult. And if anyone deviates from the line, well, we just call them weird. We terrorize them with the worst of all human fears, the greatest of all human fears, the fear of shame and loneliness. Well, biologically, we're a pack mammalian species, and without the support of the people around us, well, we don't evolve. Our odds of meeting our needs to survive, be secure, have love and belonging, self-esteem, and procreate, the odds of meeting our needs as human beings go way down when we're not supported, when we're not sanctioned by the cult, by the group, by the tribe, when we don't belong to a group. And the group decides what the line is. The group doesn't decide what intelligence is, and we don't decide what intelligence is. The group decides what the line is, and then we decide and usually find it's a good idea to adhere to the line, to stay inside the box. Because, and it's not a bad rationale, most people have survived, at least for the more recent generations, most people have lived and they were inside that box. So it's not a bad starting point. But we're certainly not dealing with intelligence. We're dealing with a crude groupthink of we're going to shame you and cast you out if you don't fit in to the box, to the line, and I'm going to fit into the line because my odds of survival go way down if I'm stigmatized and ostracized. Because the network effect, right? Even a stupid network like Facebook, statistically correlated with increased suicide, increased depression, a stupid network, right? When you invest time and energy in a network that correlates with unhappiness, that's stupidity. When you invest energy in a system and a network that correlates with well-being, well, that's intelligence. So even a stupid network like Facebook is a powerful network because so many people are part of it. Even a stupid family is going to keep you alive better than you as a sane individual, right? So join the group, be cast out. Your odds go up statistically if a group has your back, even if it's the wrong policy, right? Even if they're doing the completely wrong thing, just the fact that there's so many of them making an effort using the wrong protocols, statistically, your odds of survival and security go up than, if you're just cast out at a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, just sent off to an island somewhere without the benefit of technology. So that's the nesting into the cult, where we all find ourselves terrified of stepping across the line and terrified of being cast out and wearing a particular mask. Now, the mask, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, is generally defined by the cult. Now, you look at something like pedophilia, and it's not entirely clear. It's not entirely clear, first of all, with all fixation, the unhealth is definitely there in the compulsion, right? You've got the compulsiveness of fixating on anything. Now, fixation is symptomatic of trauma. So cults that traumatize their people create people with fixations. Now, in my experience, the fixation is somewhat malleable. And here's what I mean. When I feel at the edge of the broken identity, when I remember the memories, the patterns of energy in which I as a child was violated, overwhelmed, intimidated, etc. When I get near that terrain, the fixation energy is a countermeasure to the chaos of overwhelm. You can think of fixation as a loop, and you could think of it as an ego's response to losing itself, losing the coherence of the pattern. I don't know who I am. I can't, the pattern was shattered. The pattern was violated. And so the fixation, the compulsion, I'm going to do this and do this and do this and do this, is the need to have a coherent, strong pattern. Now, with PTSD, the fixation is the smartest medicine of all, because the very thing that broke the original identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, the very thing that broke that was the traumatic event itself. So the ego needs a reliable pattern, meaning the conscious mind cannot come up with everything that we have to deal with on a daily basis. It can't come up with everything we have to deal with on a daily basis from scratch. We've got to deal with the conscious mind in limited areas, because we just can't think about every little thing all at once. And so the identity, the recurring pattern, is necessary to move through life, because 90% of what goes on in the world requires assumptions if we're not going to overload the RAM of the conscious mind. And so we make all kinds of assumptions, and they're not intelligent assumptions. You look at the curse words of Western cult, and you have shit, the source of all life; fuck, the source of all life; dirt, the source of all life; bitch, the mother of the greatest friend to human beings, dog; bastard, someone whose parents didn't follow the cult line to be married before having sex. And you look at any of them and you try and follow what it would be like to live off planet, to live in an intelligent dimension and come down and wonder, what's the worst things about human beings that if you really want to curse them and symbolize their stupidity and malice and rottenness, what would you do as the worst things? Oh, I know, let's take dirt, the source of all life on the planet, and you dirty person. I guess I'm associated with all life. You realize there wouldn't be a single human being in the entire history of the planet without dirt. There wouldn't be a single plant without dirt, right? So some curse, right? You're associated with the core of all life, and fucking, the most pleasurable thing, the source of every human being. I mean, you've got to be pretty dumb as a cult to pick those as the things to smear someone with. You dirty person. It's a joke, right? But that's what cults do. Now, when we pick an identity, one of the things that we know is strong is that which destroyed the last identity. For example, when a child is abused by a violent bully of a father or a violent bully of a mother, very often that child, if the bullying is severe, will become a bully. And this is what's going on. The vulnerability, the helplessness of the child is this small speck of a pattern. And then there's this very big giant pattern up here that's smothering it, that is in their face, right? And what happens is the ego, the identification, gets overwhelmed with the innocent child and has no identity. It's traumatized. It's shattered. The pattern is broken. And then it looks for some strong, cohesive pattern to form. And there's the abuser shouting at them, raging and terrifying them, right? And that looks very strong. It looks like if I was that identity, then I wouldn't be broken. Then I could function, right? I can't function as a terrified infant bullied by a giant. I can't. But if I was the raging giant, So my job then as a growing identity is, since I can't hold my own against a raging giant, my job is to identify with where I am the raging giant. And so you literally have the identity blending through trauma, and you're looking at yourself with the same hatred as the raging giant. And so what happens then is, after that traumatic event, the person looks at themselves, the little boy looks at themselves with the same hatred and rage as the dad did, and says, I am this, and begins to practice that on other helpless animals and children, and identifies with that, because that's the superior identity, as identified by the fact that the other identity is broken. A new identity is necessary. We cannot function without a pattern. And you look around for the strongest pattern, and, oh, I know, I'll just copy dad. So dad gets to bully me, and I'll look at myself with contempt through dad's eyes, and then I will bully you and you and you, and I will look at you with contempt because I've learned the new pattern. And it's a stronger pattern. It's a pattern in which I'm growing, in which I'm becoming more secure. And so the migration of intergenerational identity makes perfect sense. The pattern in the family system that has the highest odds of survival, has the highest odds of security, has the highest odds of the cult's definition of love and belonging, and of validation and self-esteem, that is what will be emulated. That is the deity. So in a chauvinistic cult, that is the man who's at the head of the table, right? Which then brings up the unfairness, the jealousy within that chauvinistic paradigm. Why can't I be a boy? Why, just because I have breasts and stuff, can I never be, the top deity? But it's the same dynamic in every cult religion that has a male deity, right? If the very top of the value hierarchy is a male embodiment, then if you're a female, you can never become God. You can serve God, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You can serve the patriarch. That's what you're supposed to do. But you can never fully, God doesn't have breasts. Buddha doesn't have breasts. And Muhammad, and so it's like, well, it covers most of it in the chauvinism of today's world. All the top deity figures have to be masculine if you look through chauvinistic eyes. And so there's the migration, the copying of that which, and of course, dad will strengthen their identity by embodying, the Old Testament type of figure, speak when you're spoken to, all of this kind of thing. And without that, who's dad, right? So one of the crises right now is, what is the male identity, pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is honored, that is valued, that is viewed as a blessing, that is good, right? Because just like all pendulum swings, we're going from the dehumanization of women and the subjugation and diminishment of women to now swinging to the dehumanization of men and the elevation of women. But of course, you cannot love that which you are inferior to or superior to. Inferiority and superiority preclude love, and so you cannot love that which you pretend you are inferior to or superior to. You're separate. You're saying, I'm up here and you're down there. That's not love. Love is to join with, to honor, to become one with, to honor the connection. How can you honor the connection when your whole bigotry is based on listing all the rungs by which I'm better or worse than you, right? It doesn't matter where it is, you've got no connection. You've got dominance, you've got domination, you've got hierarchy and power dynamics, but that's not love. It's just a pendulum in the reptilian brain deciding who's going to be at the top of the dominance hierarchy. And as we move from occult technology of brawn and muscle, where males are superior, to occult technology of teamwork and collaboration, where females are superior, the domination in the hierarchy, in the information age, teamwork, communication, and collaboration is a superior technology than brawn and muscle. I mean, you've got big muscles and big abs and you can throw a spear. Your hands are big and you can't text well is all that means, right? So, but if you're in the Stone Age, in the Bronze Age, in the Iron Age, if you're in those ages and you're a taller person, a faster spear thrower, then you're superior, right? You want brawn elevated in the Bronze Age, and you want intelligence and collaboration and communication elevated in the Information Age. And females are superior, particularly you have a combination of things. You have biological traits that focus on more diffuse awareness, and you have more skill, meaning if you're a female in a chauvinistic cult, you've been allowed to hang around and hug and attune to babies and females and form alliances and talk and gossip and do this. In a chauvinistic cult, if you're a male and you express effeminate traits such hugging other males and being tender and being emotional, you're shamed and ostracized by both women and men who are chauvinists. And so you don't have as much practice. So the combination of the biological issue and the culturation issue, where the culture cultures females to be more communicative and collaborative, even like you watch my baby and I'll watch your baby, and there's an empathy basis for that. Versus you're gay, let's humiliate you because you actually had some feelings and talked about them. So that culturation dynamic in a chauvinistic cult gives females more practice at teamwork and collaboration. Not so much around vision and authority, right? And so we still tend to have more males in leadership roles, militarily and in corporations. But, it's a natural trend. Very soon, feminine traits will be shown to be winning in the new environment more than unattuned masculine traits. And men and women are no more valued than they ever were. They're equal. If you cut the one into two, you've got two equal parts. And they always have been and they always will be equal. But the emphasis and the value is shifting from the masculine traits to the feminine traits as it is appropriate. And if you look at the bipedal movement of walking, you understand that the shift from the masculine to the feminine pole needs to happen for evolution, right? And you also understand that if you try and take your right foot and keep walking forward and forward and forward, and you won't shift the weight to the other foot and then walk with the other step, you realize you can't walk as well. That the movement forward that is the most intelligent is to shift emphasis from the left side to the right side to the left side in partnership of something bigger. That something bigger emerges and happens as a result of that bipedal movement that wouldn't happen if either side took the lead. If you had a dominant left foot that would never let the right foot take a step, no, it's all about me, it's all about me. Or you had a dominant right foot that wouldn't take the left, you lose. Certainly if you're in a race with someone who's in synchronized partnership between their right and left legs, and you're a chauvinist and you think your left leg or your right leg is the superior right, you will lose. And really, that's what played a big role of bringing women into a more equal status today, is it wasn't peacetime, it was war, because in war you need a competition. And the reality is the West may have lost the war without the women. If they could have won the war just with men, they would have done it, right? But in competition, dogma and bigotry is put into tension with science, and the best science wins. In competition, the best science wins. In warfare, the best science wins. And a cult that will embrace and utilize all of the power of women will win on a per capita basis over a cult that is irrationally suppressing the competencies of women, right? And so Winston Churchill moved from advocating that women couldn't and shouldn't have the right to vote to we've got to give them their due, because he couldn't have won against Hitler without the women. And he knew it, right? So his bigotry and his upbringing, meaning he was raised a bigot by bigoted parents, his stupidity, born in lineage, in the family cult, which he carried forward to the best of his ability. He carried his family's stupidity forward to the best of his ability, but Hitler made him decide between the stupidity of his family system and the truth, which is that a cult with a collaborative, cooperative relationship between both gender, where all of the strengths of both gender are working together, is tremendously more potent, more effective than a cult that takes half of its population. Racism is the same. It's the same with prison systems. Why not arrest 50% of your population? Why not? More than 50% of your population commits crime. If you add up the speeding tickets, the tax evasion, the embezzlement, the petty theft, the spousal abuse, the drinking and driving, the use of illegal substances, you would have to reasonably arrest and imprison half of your entire population. So why not? Go ahead, right? Sheer stupidity. The cult, if there's ever a war between 1 million people who collaborate, who work with real science rather than the stupidity of their dogmas, who have 1 in 100,000 arrested and in jail, who don't use jails but actually look at the nature of the crime. Well, first of all, defining crime as causing unnecessary harm to another human being, and remedying the crime by remedying the unnecessary harm. In other words, if I burnt down your house because, I flicked a cigarette off and it caught up on your redwood fence and your house burnt down, would you rather me in jail and you pay higher taxes for the crime of burning down your house, or would you rather me build you a new house? Well, any fool, any intelligent person would say, please build my house. Don't send them to jail, right? And so it takes a certain amount of luxury and a certain amount of stupidity to ask the general public to pay $100,000 a year to take its most valuable assets, its people, and lock them up in a concrete box and then pay other people to not do anything useful, but walk up and down and make sure they don't get out of the box. Now you've got two useful, people who are taken out of commission. That is sheer cruelty. It's sheer stupidity to the cult. You're the country that's dying because you're spending more and more energy prosecuting people and punishing them rather than treating the disease and giving an opportunity for them to actually restore the damage. And you're also not learning from the issue, which is that a cult that raises sociopaths, those are people who don't care. That's all a sociopath is. I don't care. I'm numb. I don't give a damn. Is sociopathic. You cannot raise sociopaths without a sociopathic cult. So if we took the entire prison budget and we made our cult less sociopathic, what do you mean? Well, it took a year and $100,000 to get my wife into my own country. Sound a bit sociopathic to you? You think your wife might want to visit you in your own house? Well, who the fuck cares? You're a mere plebeian to be jostled around by the politics and the this and this. In other words, if you treat your people like reptiles, if you kill 1 million innocent Iraqis for politics, if you lie and kill your own people for political gain, your cult is being run by reptiles, the reptilian brain, which is making careful analysis of the politics. Well, let's see, how many points do presidents usually jump when they declare war, when they're bombing other countries? Well, it's at least 10%, right? So you're a president, it looks like you're going to lose, but if you could just start a conflict and kill some innocent people, drum up some facts that would justify it, well, your popularity will go up. Well, 100,000 people may be killed. Well, who cares, right? I'm a reptile. I'm a reptile responding to the data. I don't have feelings. Political prestige goes up during a war. It's that simple. I've got to start a war, right? So, and what kind of people elect reptiles? The reptilian brain. When the reptilian brain feels better because we've gone to war to get the bad guys, who's in charge? The reptiles, right? The reptilian brain. Fight, flight, freeze, freeze. Fight, flight, freeze, and please. That's reptilian. It's not empathic. It's not intelligent. It's about who's the bigger reptile, who's the bigger bully. It's not about love. It's not about intelligence. It's about reptilian code. So, these are the tensions of a reptilian cult that are directed at traumatized children. It works its way down. The father, given PTSD in Iraq, comes back and beats his wife statistically more than the person who wasn't asked to blow up children, who wasn't asked to be suspicious of 7-year-olds with lunchboxes. It's that simple. And that child goes up feeling sociopathic because it's too painful to feel. It's too much energy to process, and identifying with the aggressor that won in the identity battle. When a raging parent wins against a 5-year-old, some part of the 5-year-old looking for security, looking for a way through, identifies the raging parent as a pattern of survival and increased security relative to their own identity. And that becomes the strongest identity to pick from. And what the person with PTSD does that has their identity shattered. They have their identity shattered. And they know they need to function. They need an identity, and they don't know which, they don't have an identity. So what they do is they pick the most intense pattern they can grasp onto. As an instinctive, drowning human in the tsunami of the trauma, they grab the rusted nails of the traumatic event. They grab, as the ship sunk, they grab onto the fragments of the memory of the traumatic event for dear life. And they live the traumatic event over and over and over and over again as a source of identity. They identify with the traumatic event, and their need for certainty to counteract the overwhelm and uncertainty is so high that they would rather relive at an instinctual level the worst event of their life if it is solid. You see, and with the tape loops and searing in of the reptilian pattern, the traumatic pattern of the traumatic event is lucid, it's solid, it's predictable. You know exactly where it ends, and it goes round and round and round. And now I have a new identity that cannot be taken away from me. The only thing that can take away that identity is a bigger trauma or healing from being in a safe place. However, just as it takes a higher level of intelligence to solve the problem that you use to cause the problem, right? If I have a flat tire from driving over nails, it means I don't understand, the fact that rusted piles of nails give flat tires. So I need a higher level of intelligence, right? I can't pull the nails out and fix the tire if I don't understand that the nails are what create the hole, right? So if I'm dumb enough to arrest a large percentage of the population and put them in prison, I'm not smart enough to understand how to bring those people back into society as key allies. I don't understand that. And so I think I'm doing the right thing. It's a function of limited intelligence. So the person with PTSD grabs and holds on to the traumatic memory for security of identity. And it's very high security because the traumatic event is very, very intense and they feel completely discombobulated. That's what obsession is. That's what compulsion is. It's picking a narrow identity, a narrow pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. That is a strong enough gravitational pull that it stops us from entering the shattered, unstructured place of disorientation and dissociation. And so the trauma hits, the bomb goes off, the identity is broken and shattered, the cult is too incompetent to respond with the healing necessary to bring the person back to their humanity and rebuild a new identity that incorporates that possibility that could happen, but is still strong enough to hold its own. And so the person forms a reactive, synthetic, rapid identity in this compulsion, and I just gamble and gamble and gamble and gamble. And when I'm flooded with adrenaline and doing this and that, the other, then I feel safe. I feel protected from the chaos of my thoughts and feelings over here that I don't know how to deal with. I don't know how to respond, says the 5-year-old to a giant bully that's called Dad. So that's what compulsion is. It's a countermeasure to dissociation, disorientation, and overwhelm. Now, anything done compulsively has a cost. One of the costs is the fact that it's often not intelligent, right? If you have sex with everyone you meet compulsively, there are times that's going to ruin your social standing within your cult. If you drink compulsively, and sometimes you need to drive and sometimes you do this, sometimes it'll be okay. But other times it will kill you and your family. So, but if on the other side of your compulsion is a chaos that you can't deal with, is a hurt and a pain that you can't deal with, and this is the pattern that you've chosen to manage that, to give you solidity, then the compulsion is your anchor. It is your medicine for a broken identity. And you can't replace that medicine without something equally strong. This is why, the strongest thing that you can possibly build is a deep faith, trust, and awareness of one's connection to the divine, to all that is. So, spirituality is a substitute for addiction, meaning it is an identity. That if you deeply believe with faith, etc., it is that identity is strong enough to hold one together and face the traumatic event. So is the drunk. So is the porn addict. If I can just stay in an adrenaline frenzy and then collapse and go to sleep, I've got my way through the overwhelm. I've coped, I've managed, I haven't fallen apart. And when an individual is asked to face something alone that is taboo, that the cult does not build a pattern around, is one of those kind of disorienting places. A little girl who's raped by her uncle may have picked up on the body language and of people around sex and the fascination and the distraction, all that around that, so that they know that that sex is a charged thing in our cult. I mean, if you look at what Western language has the biggest number of euphemisms about, it is sex. His member was a little wiggly. What's wrong with saying his penis wiggled? Oh my goodness, right? If you look at the number of euphemisms, and it's going a little bit lower in some ways, the British carried this to an extreme, but if you look, if you look at the last 100 years of British humor, a tremendous amount of it is the tension built up by a paranoid cult that is not at peace with reality. The reality is that every single thing in existence emerged out of sex. Gases had sex with one another and produced other gases. Rain and sunlight had sex with each other and produced plants. Ants had sex with each other and produced ants. There isn't, sex is simply the act of two distinct patterns coming together and creating a third pattern, often a synergy, something that is greater than the sum of the parts. So if that's what sex is, it's the source of all life, of all reality. And if you're not at peace with that, if you think that that's a secret, oh, don't tell anyone. Sunlight and leaves produce growth in trees, my goodness. Oh, did you see what they were doing? And then you have outrage and scorn and this and this. And you have all these rigid rules. You're too old, you're too young, you're too this, you're too that, you're to do, not in the church, not in this. The Virgin Mary. When you have a religious cult that says that life was born in your cult without two energies coming together to create a synergy, your cult is based on fantasy because you can't accept reality. Because you're a nitwit, right? You really... And then when this phobia, and it begins with chauvinism. It begins with chauvinism how? Chauvinism says that people who are empathic are weak because they're not sociopathic. To a reptile, the one that won't flinch is the strongest one. That's a position of strength to a reptile. In the fight-flight dynamic, if you're the bigger one, you chase and you exploit and use. And if you're the smaller one, you run. So to survive in a reptilian paradigm, you want to be the bigger one, and you will chase, you will assert. And you want to do business with a smaller pattern of energy that's going to run away, and you want to catch it and consume its energy. That's rape, that's theft, that's murder, that's hunting. The bigger one fights and wins the smaller one. Because that's how it works. When the bowling ball collides with the pinball, there's no question which one is going to go flying. Now, there are mythological distortions of this law of physics, such as Samson, right, or Goliath and David, right, the big giant and the slingshot. But no, it's not a distortion. David used technology to make a stone fly faster than a giant's hand could throw the stone. It's that simple. With a slingshot, a smaller arm becomes a greater force than a bigger arm without a slingshot. The bigger energy dominates the smaller energy. And in a reptilian paradigm, there's no remorse, there's no awareness of that, there's no mediation of it, there's no empathy, there's no sympathy, there's no love. There's just, I'm the big one. That's how the alpha chimp is selected. That's how the wrestling king is selected. That's how the boxing king, I'm the big one. And I beat you. And so I'm the winner, and I will be rewarded by life. Life will reward me for being big and taking what I want, because then I get more big and more nourished, and you don't. You're dead or you're weak, right? So that's looking through the chauvinistic lens that is better, that being a reptile is better than being a human being, because that's how reptiles think. That's why you don't run when you encounter a bear. Because when you run from any reptilian brain, what you are communicating to the brain that you're encountering is that I think I'm smaller, that my energy density is less than yours, and that the best way for me to survive this encounter is not to fight, but to run. That transmits a signal to an animal that says, I must be bigger because they're running. And my job, if I'm bigger, is to fight and to hunt. That's the job of a bigger. And so when the bowling ball and the pinball collide, the bowling ball goes flying, the pinball continues on its original trajectory, or the bowling ball continues on its original trajectory, the pinball goes flying. If fight and fight between a pinball and a bowling ball come together, the pinball goes to flight, bounces off, involuntarily. When a lone individual goes to war with an abusive totalitarian state, their government, almost all of the time, the biology will block that fight. And when you have a Julian Assange or an Edward Snowden that have the audacity to follow the law of the land, which is not the law of the reptile. The law of the reptile is the one with the bigger mass wins. The law of the land, or the law of the land is, the reptile is the biggest mass wins. The law of the land is justice for all. A free press. We don't hound and kill journalists just because they're pointing out the corruption of power. We celebrate journalists. That's the law of the land. Well, when Julian Assange exposed more corruption in the US power structure than any other journalistic agency on earth, number one, and two, showed a willingness to publish it, despite death threats and bribes, and three, was going to continue doing so, then you see law after law after law in the biggest power structure on earth, the US military, the US government, bullying other governments behind closed doors, shouting, raging, putting up hundreds of millions of dollars. We want this guy dead. We're bigger and we're going to get him, and fuck these laws. And the world stands by, unwilling to confront the bully, unwilling to confront the largest reptile on earth, unwilling to stand by the law. You know, Hitler followed the law up to a point to where he would follow a law and make a promise and a statement, etc., and then he would bring his military up to a point where people didn't want to challenge him if he broke the law. Nobody wanted another World War I. England didn't. Its people didn't. And so, Hitler just kept amassing fear. The biggest army on earth. The biggest army the earth had ever seen. More money, more energy going into the Reich. Who wants to face that? And Churchill kept arguing, let's form a coalition to knock the biggest threat to global peace down a bit. Nobody wanted to risk that confrontation. There was an appeasement mode, where there was a running mode. Well, we just won't look over there. We won't talk about this. Hitler would write to Neville Chamberlain and say, this is completely outrageous that this newspaper said this about me. And Neville Chamberlain would do Hitler's bidding, right? To avoid a confrontation between a smaller energy and a larger energy. So that's where you have please. You have fight, flight, freeze, and please, trying to please the bully, the dictator. So if you can position yourself to be the biggest bully, the biggest energy, then you can get what you want through coercion, through manipulation, etc. Now, that's the tension. Are we human beings or are we reptiles? You see, the reptile isn't human, and so it doesn't understand trust, love, and empathy. To a reptile, someone who believes you is a fool. Because now I could exploit you. You know, to Hitler, when people believed him, he thought less of them. Because to a reptile, there's no understanding that there could be anything bigger than the reptilian brain. It takes a human being to grieve the loss of trust. There is no trust among reptiles. If you're bigger than me, I will run, or I will please you, enable you. If you're smaller than me, words mean nothing. I'll do what I want. And that's the ranking order. That's the pecking order. Who can kill the most people the most efficiently is at the top of the pecking order, if you're a human being. And that power will be used to amass the most wealth, which is also at the top. So now you've got military power and economic power. That's the pecking order. That's the system that we are largely in. You know, it's not a black and white. We're 40% reptiles. And we're 20% rational, right? That's governing. And the reptile appreciates the rational sociopath is the most dangerous, the most potent predator on the planet, the rational sociopath, the one that knows when to attack and when to run, that has no moral scruples, doesn't mind destroying other people's lives to get what it wants. That's a very, very efficient. The rational sociopath is incredibly efficient at pursuing their agenda. You see, an empath is bound by all kinds of things. What if, oh, you're upset if I do that? Well, an empath can be paralyzed. I can't do this because this neighbor is upset, and I can't do this because this neighbor is upset, and they don't agree with each other, so I can do nothing. A rational sociopath, on the other hand, doesn't care about either one of them. It figures out the power dynamic and how to leverage this, and maybe pays a bribe, maybe gets some video footage of the other person doing something slightly illegal and blackmails them and does exactly what they want to do. It's very, very, very efficient. The reptile loses nothing. The human loses everything. To be a reptile, you give up love, you give up real belonging, you give up trust, you give up trustworthiness, you give up honor, you give up ideals, you give up any sense of divinity, any sense of being part of something bigger than ourselves. There's no meaning other than to stay alive. A reptile has survival down. It's good at it. It can survive, it can outlive, it can outmaneuver. A rational sociopath can outlive all kinds of people that are worried about feelings, that are hurt by feelings. You know, you can hurt someone's feelings if they're a human being. You know, and they need a few days to grieve. If you kill their mother, and there was any kind of a bond there, the person doesn't just go on firing a machine gun. So a rational sociopath, kill his mother, and then while he's a bit disoriented, do this, 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 and this. It's a strategic level of lucidity that is highly efficient as a reptile within the reptilian paradigm. And love, the reptile has never known love. The reptile cannot love. Empathy. For what? So you have to be a human being to be able to love, to have trust, etc. So to lose honor, to lose empathy, those are the most valuable things that anyone has ever known. But see, a bullied child that lost their innocence by age 5 has never known love because nobody protected that child. The child that transferred their identity to that of the sociopathic parent out of terror would have to go through a wall of life and death terror to reclaim their humanity in a cult that pretends that nothing's going on. And they can't do it. To a human being looking at that, this is something to cry about. There's something valuable being lost. A reptile has no observing and measuring devices to see that pattern. They will not grieve what was lost until they find their humanity. The pain threshold of entering the human brain becomes higher and higher the more reptilian energy has transferred through their body. When you're a rational reptile and you kill 30 million of your own people, as Joseph Stalin, it's not hard. But to go from the reptilian brain to the empathic brain and realize what you've done in the process, because the empathic brain makes you feel what the other one felt. To do that with 30 million people, it's too hard. It's too hard to let in the death of 30 million people by my hands, what that felt like. And so the doorway into the human brain is padlocked by too many corpses, too many tears, which reinvigorates the need to stay reptilian. And the need to stay reptilian is the need to be in power, to be at the top, to be the highest bully. And that need dictates terrorizing. Meaning that's the only path to stay the highest bully, is to terrorize a country, a culture, a world. If you've got nuclear weapons, if you're a sociopath, if you're a murderer, if you've demonstrated your willingness to kill, and you're at the top of the power structure, you can terrify people into allowing a certain amount of your predation, your bullying. And that's the only thing you've got to hang on to, is staying at the top, because as soon as you go to the bottom, all of the people you hurt are going to kill you. And in a reptilian environment, because reptilian environments breed reptilian people who become totalitarian leaders, in a reptilian environment, they're not going to forgive you either. They're not going to understand. They're not going to empathize. They are going to shoot you and your family with the same efficiency. You know the rules in the reptilian game. So it makes it very hard to get off the playing field. So you give up the power, it's always going to be someone going to find you. If you stop bullying to some degree, the reptile is in the language of fear. So you have to do a certain amount of killing so that everyone knows that if they go against you and weaken your power position, there is a whatever percent chance that they're going to end up dead and that you have the power to do it. Because that's what keeps a totalitarian structure in place. Someone was once bullied and learned the law of mass. their solution was to become a bigger bully. They climbed all the way up the power structure in a reptilian environment, succeeded. Then their greatest fear became losing that. Because as soon as you've climbed up there, you've already betrayed, made deals, let someone down, and you're going to be killed if you go down. You've got to stand on top, and you've got to show that you can win repeatedly, or people may doubt it and take you out. There's no way off that block, you know. Once you're an Adolf Hitler, you may get tired of being Hitler. You may get tired of it, but you can't walk away easily. You know, it's usually dictator for life or death, to life to death, or fleeing, you know, another country and making some kind of a deal, because the rest of the world will trade money. You know, there's segments of people who are so dehumanized by people valuing money ahead of human beings that if a Putin or a Trump or whatever dictator wants to make $1 billion deal with a group of people, as long as he's willing to pay up, there'll be a safe haven. There'll be a Swiss bank account. There will be facilitation. They'll pay 3 times the real estate value. They'll have their own private security, this, that, the other, and then they can kind of transition away from power. But they've got a bullet on their head by 1 million people who'd like to see them dead if they had the chance, right? And so it's not an easy dynamic. We'll leave it at that.